How are you?
Very well, Jyotsna. How are you?
I'm so sorry for making you do this late at night in Australia.
Don't worry about it. I'm quite nocturnal. But what's interesting is there's a storm that's just brewed out of the blue, as often happens in the Gold Coast. So my windows are rattling but well, such is life.
How's the shifting been? Has it been okay?
It's been okay. It's been a very interesting experience to move during COVID. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to our talk today.
Thank you, Tara, for coming on the show today. Tara, of course, is the author of Why Men Rape, and nothing seems to change too much as we go along. But we're going to be speaking about what she's written in her book and what has really happened even during COVID. So, Tara, the reason why I'm having this is also because we were having this conversation a couple of days ago when I'd written a piece on domestic abuse, and the kind of trolling that I was subjected to, for the simple reason that it happens to men too, and women are the aggressive ones, and we are the one. And there's another one I got recently, that men are the ones who pay the taxes, right? So do what you have to with that, and so they have a right to do what they want. Tell me something, since you've written the book and since you've taken out your book, has anything changed or has it gotten worse?
I wrote the book last year. Nothing is going to change in a year. It's not something that we are prioritizing as a society, as a government. Even this conversation of putting the onus back on the men where it belongs is a conversation that stays largely in the academic sphere. So nothing has changed at all. The rape myths exist as they have always done. Victim blaming continues as it always has. The false rape complaint narrative continues to be the primary rape myth in the world. So no, nothing's changed, Jyotsna. Certainly not thousands of years of misogyny and patriarchy isn't going to change with my book as much as I'd like it to.
So has it on the contrary increased during COVID? I mean, you get a lot of feedback, you get a lot of messages, you get anonymous messages. I'm presuming you do, because I get for different reasons, but there's a lot of interaction on DMs with people who've read our books. Has something, did you realize or did you notice some kind of a change during COVID when everybody's, isolated, when everybody is stuck inside those four walls?
Well, it would be, right? I mean, we've even recently, there was this statistic that I read about how violence increases when the England team loses. The English football team loses.
Yes, I read that.
And yeah, we read that. I mean, it was, and it seems like every time a man feels powerless or angry, it is the people around them that face the brunt of their anger. And anger is, of course, one of the many causes of rape. COVID has increased a lot of frustration, a lot of economic frustration, a lot of, being stuck inside. No modern marriage or relationship was designed to be with the person 24 hours in the day under stressful circumstances. Your very existence, your survival is in question. So violence has definitely increased. And as we know, contrary to the stranger danger idea of abuse, it's people that are closest to us that are actually the most common and the most frequent perpetrators of violence, of gender-based violence. So there's no reason to assume that it would have gone down in COVID. In fact, all signs, all statistics.
I'm presuming your Wi-Fi is a bit, it's playing COVID around a little bit, Tara. I'm presuming this is the weather with your Wi-Fi. It was on and off a little bit in the middle. But you're back.
Okay.
You're back.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I think as we learn, and I'm sure, when we were younger and we were listening to all the kind of incidents and cases and crime, I think it's very easy to, think in very binary terms, in terms of the fact that it's poverty and it's lack of education, and leave it at that, right? And I think the more you grow up and the more you go into things, there are just so many reasons behind what makes men do what they do.
Absolutely. And it's certainly, we've got this Shakti Kapoor idea of,
Yes.
idea that it's some stranger monster type man hiding in the bushes. And the Jyoti Singh Pandey case kind of fed into that narrative, that they were lower caste, lower class, dark men, monsters that we can see as monsters. But that's clearly not how, that's not a norm. And in fact, upper class men have a lot more means and opportunity. Like I look at the Shiny Ahuja case of him abusing his maid. I see upper class men have a lot more opportunity, entitlement, and impunity when it comes to domestic violence. So there's absolutely no reason to subscribe to the stranger danger myth. That's been disproved. 99.1% of women who have been raped 99.1% of women have been abused or raped at least once in their domestic relationships. These are statistics you cannot ignore. So I think instead of looking at the outside space as dangerous, we also need to conceptualize the inside space as equally problematic. And that's where it all begins in any case. The patriarchy, the misogyny, it all starts at home.
I don't agree with, that there's a view, as Sumesh has written, it's a mental illness of upper class men too. I agree with the upper class men too idea, but I wouldn't say this. I mean, it's easy to just dismiss it as a mental illness, isn't it?
No, it's a societal illness. It's a societal illness. It's an idea that it's a consequence of patriarchy. The suggestion that that there are only two genders and that men are superior to women this ideology allows them to express their anger towards women when things are not going their way. It also allows them to express entitlement when it's just a sexual need. When it comes to a question of his needs versus hers, it's very easy under patriarchy to discount her needs and to believe that your needs are more important. So I don't really think it's a mental illness, although there are some people who have mental illness and also perpetrate gender violence. But it's a norm. It's a norm that a lot more men have the ability to discredit than women do, because we know it. And what's interesting to me, what was really interesting to me is I meet a lot of feminists, even older feminists, or women who, live their lives, but at some point I've met women who've told me, get on with it. That's the female experience. It's okay. But when I crowdfunded for my book, I was very interested to find that a lot of the funding came from older women, especially ones with daughters, because it's all very well to say, we've experienced it, ho gaya hai, now moving on from this. But you don't want your daughters to experience what you have. And that to me was really telling, because you can't dismiss the universal female experience as it has existed for centuries.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing, and you never really know what's going on behind those walls. I mean, my parents have these friends, really wonderful, elderly people, very, very nice looking and very calm looking people. And it was just recently I got to know that, the husband beats the wife up, and he's been doing it for a while. And you would never know, because we don't really speak up as much as we should. Unfortunately, like you said, you don't want your girls to be in that position, but Yet you don't speak up about it. You probably go about it in a different way, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And you know what was interesting to me, and we were talking about domestic violence, especially after you were trolled for your article. And there's this article that I often refer to. It's by it's by a really famous person who works with men and boys. And it's a 2015 article where he is in this classroom and he ends up asking abusive men what they or how they benefited from violence. And of course, rape is one part of gender-based violence, but domestic violence is a more common experience, as you were discussing. And I looked at the list today, and I thought I'd just point out. Say it was a really long list, but I'm going to just read out some of the things that these men said were the benefits of expressing or of beating their wives, including she's scared and won't go out and spend money. You get your way. You get respect. She won't argue. Feeling superior. She's accountable to me in terms of being somewhere on time. I decide. Keeping relationship going. She's too scared to leave. Get the money. Get sex. Total control in decision making. Don't have to change for her. Power. She's scared and can't confront me. She feels less worthy, so defers to my needs and wants. Ego booster. She tells me I'm great. Bragging rights. If she works, I get her money. And the list goes on. So my point is domestic violence and the threat and fear of rape and the threat and fear of domestic violence in general keeps women and their agency under control. It's sexual terrorism.
Absolutely.
And it's sexual terrorism. And what is terrorism? The threat and fear of violence, and it polices us. So I don't think anyone who discounts domestic violence or anything that comprises the sexual violence pyramid is doing a great service to the gender equation and women.
And there's, when you were listing out the kind of things that they say in defense of it in a way, right? There's the other thing is when somebody gets married and there is domestic abuse, I think the most common one that comes out is you'll have a child and everything will be okay, just have a child.
Yep. Yep.
Very common,
And
right?
we know how that is such a recipe for disaster. We know how that is such a recipe for disaster. So I do think abusers change. One of the things that but I do feel that self-awareness is key. And a lot of things happen. I mean, I see people who've been abused when they were children and have grown up to say, I hated that and I will never do that to someone that I love. And I have seen people who use the same experience and say, hey, this is my nature, this is my nurture, and this is how things are. And this is what I will do when I get the power. So I think you see your childhood or what you see around you as a pivot. You could choose to be the breaker of these cycles. And I think that's very important for men who are the primary stakeholders in this. I think it's very important for men to be able to look at the patterns that they have inherited through their families and through society and actually challenge them.
But my worry is that if this is something that they see at a very young age, they learn to internalize it on the other hand. And I'll give you an example. There was this boy that I wrote about for my book. He went and he asked this girl to go out with him, and she refused. He asked her a couple of times. The third time, he just took her forcefully against the wall. He kissed her. And when he was called by the school authorities, he said, I asked her a couple of times and she refused. And then I took what is mine. And now his parents, so these professors, very, very, respected gentlemen and women outside in college, but the father was beating the other. And so he's grown up seeing this is how it is.
No, I totally agree with you, Jyotsna. I do agree with you. But I often say that at some point, whether it's when you're 18 and you're considered an adult, or whether it's when your prefrontal cortex develops by the age of fully developed by the age of 25. At some point, you need to take onus on your own action, of your own actions. You need to take responsibility. So one of the examples that I often quote is alcoholism. So I grew up in a military family where there's a lot of alcohol. Everybody around me drank. All my father's friends, their wives, everyone drank, and it was social, and it was sometimes more than social for some people. That's made me a teetotaler because I saw what it did, and these bumbling uncles at parties, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to drink. I also have a friend who he's an army child, and Arun drinks every day, like it's just casual. He drinks every day because that's the norm. That's the norm he grew up with, and he thinks it's normal. So you can look at any one of your experiences and make this decision. The child of an alcoholic could always say, nature, nurture, I'm going to do exactly that. Or you could choose to break the pattern. So I really look at childhood as a pivot, and then it intersects with self-awareness. And at some point, you need to grow that. And I think at some point, you need to decide what you want to do with those experiences, whether you want to replicate them or challenge them.
That's brilliant. It's really well said, Tara. I totally agree with you. I think, at the end of it, we have to take the onus. We have to own up to what we want to do, how we want to take ourselves forward. And, society will always be there. Society is always there. Tell me something. Can you share with us any of the messages or appeals for help that you get?
Well, so the appeals for help, so I get messages of all sorts. When the book came out, I and HarperCollins didn't really, we knew that eventually it would become a bestseller. I thought we planned for it to sit in libraries for years and, gather steam and be a kind of sleeper hit over time. We were surprised at the numbers, and I realized that, not that it surprised me, but every woman I know, everybody has experienced sexual violence, gender-based violence. Every single person that I know. So for me, most of the messages that I get are survivors just wanting to talk, wanting to thank me, wanting to express solidarity, telling me their stories. Some of it is instant appeal for help. A few months ago, I got a mail from somebody regarding this 16-year-old in Kuala Lumpur who was being raped by her father and her tutor. And so then it was clear and present danger, and I had to reach out to some people in Malaysia and get her some help. So there's that. Most of it is survivors, and a lot of it is people just, thanking me for the book. But what is most interesting is the number of messages I have received from young men. That to me is fascinating. There was somebody who's from Delhi who's studying in London who wrote me an email saying, my 16-year-old sister bought the book, and I decided to buy it as well. And he read it on the flight to London, and he just wrote me this mail saying, I never saw it, and I do now. So I think we as women are also subject to patriarchy. We are also on the one hand, we want men to respect no means no, but on the other hand, we also we also have been taught to play hard to get. So while we have to look at patriarchy and examine our own behaviors, the gender that most benefits from patriarchy, the gender that perpetrates the violence, that's the gender that I really want to target. And so I'm most interested in conversations with young men.
So I was very enamored with your phrase, as I was telling you, on woke misogyny. Where did that come from?
Oh gosh, I think I mentioned it in my book as well. I think, it's very easy for us to look at men in, even if they're upper class, but look at them in traditional spaces and say, it's okay, gender-based violence is something that comes from your patriarchy. Okay, Alok Nath is not a good example as a person because he's been accused of Me Too as well, in Me Too as well. But, when you look at the Sanskari uncle, you look at him and say, maybe there's a patriarchal streak and maybe that will result in gender violence. And I'm quite cautious. But there is a lot of liberal men, and one of whom was the subject in the book that I did. There are a lot of liberal men who co-opt the language of freedom and feminism and, being forward. But they're not. And Kavita Krishnan and I were talking the other day about this as well, how in the left liberal intelligentsia, and not the feminists, but they're the most conflicted about Afghanistan. Yeah. The feminists were like, hey, it's pretty black and white. This is shitty for the women. But those that were left liberal were looking at it in a more, American rights and their rights and don't interfere. For us, for the feminists, it was pretty black and white. But there are a lot of people in the liberal sphere who co-opt this language, who co-opt, forward thinking and these words, but they're actually the most dangerous. They are what I call wolves in sheep's clothing, because you trust them. You think, they're aware of my rights, but these are not, I don't think a public proclamation to any particular ideology guarantees that a person is actually that way.
So sexual rights and even consent, very important. Did you find while you were writing your book that there was enough awareness about it even in the urban milieu?
No, not at all. And Jyotsna, very early on, I was in rural Maharashtra somewhere, and I was sitting by this fort and I was reading my book, and there was this gaggle of college boys who came up to me and they're like, what you doing? And I was like, hey, I'm writing this book about rape. And they were like, about what? So then, of course, I decided that they should sit and chat with me because I really wanted to learn some stuff from them. And what was interesting to me, and that was one of my biggest learnings in the book, was one of the boys looked at me and said, Didi, problem pata hai kya hai? So I said, what? And they're like, kisi ko pata hi nahi ki rape kya hai. So it took me a minute to understand what this man said, this boy said. But it was entirely true. There is no commonly agreed definition of what is rape. And it it's not only what happened in the Delhi gang rape. It's not Shakti Kapoor in the Hindi movies where there's bachao, bachao. It's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more nuanced. It happens in our homes. But there is no commonly agreed definition of rape. So a lot of, and of course, we know this from marital rape still being legal in India, not even considered rape. That for me, it's fairly simple. If you recognize the sexual rights and autonomy of a particular being, and you situate consent and rape from that framework, it's fairly simple to understand what is rape. Non-consensual stuff is rape, But there is no common understanding of what is rape, let alone what is consent, even in the urban space.
And that is very, very scary. Very, very scary. And that's where, and that also then, goes to what we were meant to speak about right in the beginning, marital rape. Even if there is understanding, you choose not to understand it because it's more convenient. I mean, you're legally sanctioned to do what you want.
Yeah, and the fear. If you look at it on all sorts of, it's a universal experience that being hurt by someone you love is a way more traumatizing experience than being hurt by someone you don't love. It's pretty simple. It involves trust issues. It involves, um, a lack of love. It brings in so much more into the equation. I mean, for instance, the things that trolls tell me, I DGAF. But if the same things were said to me by someone I cared about, I would be really distraught. So when you look at marital rape, it's different that you're being hurt by your primary relationship. You're being hurt in your primary relationship by somebody that's supposed to love and protect you and your pati dev and all of those things. So how destabilizing and how traumatizing that particular experience is inconceivable. And yet it is the norm.
It is the norm.
It is the norm.
I'm telling you,
sanctioned socially and legally.
Yeah. And there's this Chhattisgarh judge, Tara, who just recently said sexual act with wife is not rape, even if it is forced. This is this week.
Yeah.
Where do we go?
It's this week. It's 2,000 years ago. Nothing's changed. We are still seen as possessions and not as people. So nothing's changed. We keep hoping it will, but it hasn't. It hasn't. So yeah, marital rape is still legally sanctioned in India, and it's still the norm. And it's still unpunished, because how do you punish something that is legally okay? So yeah.
We are where we were.
We are where we were.
I know. And unfortunately, the time is not where it was. And I think I can't believe we've already done almost half an hour of chatting. And I could carry on, but I think I have to let you go in half an hour. I promised you a half hour. But tell me one last words, Tara. What is it that women can do to better their own state? I mean, I'm not saying hope on the judges or the courts or the people or the men, I mean, I've seen how they can react. But they're always the good and the bad. And I say and I tell these men, I said, it's never going to be either or. If you think, there's a woman who's done wrong by a guy, please go complain about the woman. But why must it be that this woman has done it, so all women are bad and domestic abuse is, just a fallacy? It is not a fallacy. It happens. But how do we... Is it by beginning to firstly just tell them about their sexual rights? I think begin from the basic. How do we do this? Or explain the definition of rape, as you said. We don't have a definition.
That's of course super important. I think it's very important for us to recognize our own sexual rights and other people's sexual rights and know what they are. I've often said that we need comprehensive sexuality education in schools. And unfortunately, in India, education is a state government subject. And the fuddy-duddies sitting in legislature, don't understand anything of the porn and the complexities that you've written about in your book that kids today are faced with. So I've often said that we should actually call it moral science. We should have sexuality education and call it moral science for all I care, because knowing about your body and your rights and others' bodies and their rights is certainly moral and science. And about, I think, the onus women need to, of course, be feminists, say we're feminists, claim economic and other rights and go forward with that. But to me, it's more interesting and more important for men to be feminists and men to claim to be feminists. Because it only takes a little bit of examination and a little bit of empathy to look at the world and recognize that it is patriarchal, that it does exist. We do exist as a patriarchy. But even if you see it, and a lot of men see it, it's very hard to give up the privileges that come with being the more valued gender, so to speak. There are consequences of patriarchy on men which are not pleasant, but that's besides the point. Today, I think if you don't see patriarchy and you don't see feminism as being important, it means that you don't see historic rights, which makes you either an idiot or an asshole, or both.
Yeah, I get it. That's a wonderful way to end it. I don't think anything is left to be said after that, Tara. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
No, honestly, this is a long overdue conversation, but I mean, it's not a one-off. I have to keep getting you back because we have to keep having these conversations and, keep trying to amplify what needs to be amplified, honestly speaking. But for now, I'm going to let you go. Tara Kaushal, the author of Why Men Rape. Do get her book. I will definitely get it for the simple reason that I haven't yet. I'm not a Kindle person, and it's part of my list for when I reach Delhi to get my book soon. Hopefully, it's been a year and a half. But I'm wishing you all the best with your next one, Tara. Enjoy the weather. And
thanks, Jyotsna. Have a lovely evening. Speak soon.
Bye, Tara. Thank you
Bye.
so much.